A pleasant good afternoon to all the participants, all the people out there. This is a very special day, December the 12th, when the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the Office of Research, Academics and Student Affairs, we join today with the National Joint Action Committee to present to you a rededication of 1970. We call it a movement towards people's power and national unity. I am your moderator, Hollis Liverpool, and I'll be assisted by our technician, Mr. Gansham Mohammed of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And we'll bring you this afternoon a program to mark the 50th anniversary of the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970, which some people call the Black Power Revolution. But before I bring you the persons to tell you about this great day, this wonderful day, we always start at the University of Trinidad and Tobago and at the National Joint Action Committee. We always start our work with a prayer. And I want to ask, in the absence of Mr. Mobuta, I want to ask Brother Ayagoro Ome to bless us all with a short prayer. All is yours, Brother Ome.
To this point of our existence, where annually we rededicate ourselves to the principles and the practices of the revolution that was begun in 1970. On this occasion, I remember the late great Chief Servant Makandal Daga and all the other stalwarts who have passed on. In particular, Brother Tuku Mohini, who joined his ancestors 2 days ago, and as is well known in the tradition of the Africans, once we call the name of those who have passed on, they live in the afterlife. Brother Mohini, you live among us again. I want to pray for us to have a successful webinar today as we look at various aspects of the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970, otherwise called the Black Power Revolution. And we seek to enlighten those who are listening and to ask those who have not been present or were not present at that time to understand what we did, what we accomplished, and hopefully what we shall do for the future. At the end of the prayer, I'd like all to say, you hear me, the words that we use at the end of Yoruba prayer, which is Ashe, which means so be it. And I'd like you all to say with me, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Modupwe.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Thank you very much, Brother Ayagoro. So we are well blessed now. And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, this outstanding day is being put on by the National Joint Action Committee and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to first bring to the microphone the servant leader of the National Joint Action Committee, Brother Kwesi Mutema, who is the holder of an MA in Business Administration. He served on the board of the University of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015. He served as a senator and minister in the Ministry of Works in 2015. And I want to ask him, as it's only fitting I should ask him, as the servant leader of the National Joint Action Committee, to give us some remarks of welcome. Brother Mutema.
I would say the chairman and board of governors of UTT, to our moderator, Professor Liverpool, and all our presenters, as well as our online viewers. I say welcome to this program, which is a very historic event. In fact, I would say it's of double significance. For one thing, today we observe the 50th anniversary of the rededication march that took place 50 years ago on this very date, the 12th of December. But also of much significance is that all of our presenters at this webinar today have all been involved in some way, in some active way, with that revolution in 1970. And I think that to me is very significant and something that we need to note. Because I think we're very blessed to have all of these people here with us today. And our event today, as I say, while we may be focusing on events that took place 50 years ago, however, today's program is not just about the past. Because I think as a people, we need to have a better appreciation of history on the whole, in that history is not just about the past. History provides many lessons to us that can assist us in coping with the present in order to shape and determine the future. And when we look at 1970, the reality is that almost every issue under the sun was dealt with during that period, with solutions provided as well. However, maybe unfortunately, many of those issues are still relevant today. And therefore, that period in our history, 1970, is still relevant to us today as it was 50 years ago. And therefore, I think that for that reason, this program was organized, and I must thank and compliment the chairman of UTT, particularly Professor Clement Imbe, who immediately responded in a very positive way when he was approached with the idea. And by extension, much thanks must go to the board of governors of UTT as well, who agreed for the university to collaborate with NJAC in hosting this event. As well, I think it is very much a blessing for us to have amongst us as participants today, as our presenters within this seminar, many of those who were major participants and leaders in that revolution. And thank God, they're still with us here today. So I think we have much to be thankful for. And I would hope that today, this program will be able to bring further enlightenment to the population, that will be able to bring clarity on a number of issues, and most of all, provide motivation to our people to continue that struggle for a new and better society. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Brother Mutema, for your words of wisdom. History provides lessons for us and help us to determine the future. I'm glad you mentioned that most of the participants today are actually participants, persons who participated in that movement in 1970. Thank you again. Let me now bring to the podium, the virtual podium, that is, Professor Emeritus Winston Sweet. But let me tell you first about, for those of us who don't know Professor Winston Sweet, Professor Winston Sweet moved his way. You know, I had some students once who asked me once, how do you become a professor? And I was telling them that you get there by degrees. And so Professor Emeritus Winston Sweet moved his way up from Presentation College to the University of the West Indies, to his Bachelor of Science degree in physics, teaching at QRC, teaching at San Fernando, and then observing what is happening in 1970 and joining the revolution in his own way, observing the toils of Black people in 1970, especially in San Fernando. And after a while, they made him, he did his PhD in civil engineering, his master's first in construction engineering in 1982, and then his professorship, and now he serves as senior academic fellow at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to bring to the virtual podium a Professor Emeritus at the highest level we have, and I want to bring him to offer remarks on behalf of the Board of Governors and all the lecturers of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Professor Winston Sweet. All's yours, Professor Winston, all's yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Liverpool. Brothers, sisters, ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of the commemoration of the 1970 Black Power Revolution, we are here at a webinar organized by the National Joint Action Committee, NJAC, and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. This webinar is entitled 1970, a Movement Towards People's Power and National Unity. It is my deepest pleasure that I am here to bring greetings on behalf of the University of Trinidad and Tobago, UTT, the National University, on the occasion of the commemoration of this most momentous period of transition in our history of our twin island republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed of the Anglophone Caribbean. I bring greetings to the members and leadership of the National Joint Action Committee, NJAC, to the distinguished panelists, and to the invited participants and the audience gathered to this webinar. From the chairman, Professor Clement Imbert, and the Board of Governors of the University of Trinidad and Tobago, Board of Management, and from the President, Professor Prakash Prasad of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. The National University, UTT, recognizes the importance of commemorating the events of 1970 revolution and supports and endorses the need for this webinar and its objectives of a deeper analysis of the circumstances that led to the events of the 1970 revolution. The webinar comes at a critical occasion in the history of the Twin Island state, 58 years after our declared independence, 186 years after the Emancipation Declaration. It comes at a time when the Caribbean people, through their people's organizations, like NJAC, through their respective governments, as well as through the principal forum of CARICOM, the collective voice of the Anglophone people in the main, have issued a demand for reparation for both the period of enslavement from 1516 to 1834 and for the colonial period from 1835 to 1962. That represents the two periods for which we are claiming reparation. The webinar also comes at an opportune moment for us to assess as well what has been the economic fate of the descendants of the African enslavement in the period post-1970. We must clinically review what has happened in the wake of the 1970 revolution. We must first do the accounting for that period, 1970 to 2020, 50 years. The central question is, what has been on the debit side versus what has been on the credit side? I have no doubt that this exercise of both accounting with respect to the past will take place as well as proposals for the path forward for us as a community and as a nation. What will we say in 50 years' time, not only of 1970, but of the period 2020 to the time 2070 of the next 50 years? We wish you every success in this most important deliberation, and that the deliberations of today will light the path for the next 50 years. Thank you very much, and welcome to the webinar on behalf of the National University, the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Ashe, ashe, ashe.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Winston Sweet, Professor Emeritus Winston Sweet. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, many persons, Brother Mutemba was saying at the beginning that he's very happy that most of the persons who are speaking this afternoon are actually participants people who took part in the 1970, and by sure that Professor Sweet is one of those persons who just didn't take part just by walking or marching, but was actually imprisoned and suffered the scars of that revolution. But history will absolve him from all what they did to him in those days. We at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, we are very, very proud of Professor Winston Sweet. One of the reasons why we are very proud of Winston Sweet is that, as I have told him already, we have met so many engineers, not in Trinidad alone, but outside of the country, so many engineers who are only interested in engineering. And we have a man like Winston Sweet who always takes part in things like history and the arts, and who understands the importance of the arts in Trinidad and Tobago especially. So thank you very, very much, Professor Sweet. Let me go on now, ladies and gentlemen, to begin all the speakers. Start the conference now with the speakers. And I want to bring on the first speaker, who is a professor in his own right, Mr. Brother Mbao Moheni. And I want to tell you that Brother Moheni lived through the experiences also of 1970. And he's undoubtedly one of the most educated writers, or one of the most educated authors in this period, because he witnessed all these events that make up the history of 1970. He was quietly noting all these things and writing them. My knowledge of him goes back, you know, to him being principal in Tobago of St. Elizabeth's College, that made a big mark in Tobago. That's my knowledge of him. For years, he was the principal. But he was always documenting all the occurrences in the National Joint Action Committee for years. He served as Minister of State in the Ministry of National Security. He served as a government senator in the 10th Republican Parliament. And the last time I heard of him, he was in my own area in Duke Martin, where he was working very, very hard as a candidate in the last election. So I want to bring to the virtual podium the Deputy Political Leader of the National Joint Action Committee and the servant president of the National Joint Action and chairman of the NACC. I want to bring Brother Mbao Moheni. Brother Moheni.
Thank you very much, Professor Liverpool, and pleasant good evening to all at this historic webinar, where we reflect on a most critical period in our nation's history. Because on this day and date, 50 years ago, Saturday, 12 December 1970, the National Joint Action Committee held a demonstration calling on the nation for us all to rededicate our lives to the cause of that new and just society which we had set as our objective. And this came merely three weeks after the ending of the state of emergency, which had lasted from 21st April to 20th November. It means, therefore, that after 7 months, where every effort was made to deny the achievements, not just of the National Joint Action Committee, but more so the achievements of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, NJAC was able to rally our people to come out and rededicate themselves to the cause again. So much so that the powers that be began to get very worried when they realized the population was responding. That it moved them to declare a state of emergency in Port of Spain, not only preventing the rededication march from entering the city, the capital city, but even more so, using it through the media as a propaganda tool to give the population the impression that no demonstration could have been held on the 12th of December. Because what they would do, they would open by stating that there's an emergency in Port of Spain, and then they would go on and they would not mention Port of Spain again, but they would keep saying no gathering of trees, no marching, and they would carry that on for a few minutes. So anyone who did not pick up the Port of Spain would believe it's for the whole country. However, notwithstanding that, as the march began to, or word of the march began to get out to the wider population, people began to fall into the demonstration. And that rededication march is of critical importance and significance, not only to NJAC, the NJAC leadership, those who would have created or led that revolution in 1970, it is even of greater significance to the population, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the Caribbean. And during that period of 1970, which we often quote in referring to 1970, what we sometimes fail to realize is that the 1970 that we speak about, where in our minds we think about 70 as a year, the focal point of the revolution was only for 55 days, less than 2 months. And yet, within that short space of time, the population of this country, under the leadership, the distinguished leadership of NJAC and Makandal Dagger, the population were able to lay in motion and lay a foundation for the transformation of this society in ways that we have not as yet begun to describe. And this is why I pay so much tribute to the population. In looking at Rededication Day in 1970, we are looking at the organization that did it, NJAC, and all those who participated in the leadership or in NJAC generally in 1970. We are looking at the leader, Makandal Dagger, who is most relevant to the observance of Rededication Day today because of the example that he set, his determination to see the population and the people participate and be a part of the process, his unrelenting stand for that sense of democracy, that sense of fair play, giving everyone a chance, that sense of inclusion, where in 1970, the slogan would have been young and old, all belong in the new society. And NJAC opened up doors for persons who prior to 1970 would not only have been left on the periphery, but they would have been abused, victimized, dehumanized. And we look also at the organization that did it. Those persons who were on the platform, those persons who were in the demonstration. And again, too, you are seeing people who have committed themselves, who were an example and who motivated the population. But most of all, the people. Because NJAC, the organization, Makandal Daga, the leader, and what was done in 1970, they brought something that we began to speak about after a period of time, after a few weeks, which was called the new consciousness, okay, which would have included Black consciousness, because prior to 1970, Black was a curse word in the society. And there was a new consciousness, a new pride in ourselves, a new energy being placed on striving to eradicate that colonial legacy that made us believe that Black people were inferior. And it also would have motivated our people to participate in the revolution that the people themselves would have created. You look at the amount that has come out of the 1970 period in terms of culture, the economy, family life, education. It could only have been achieved because of the energy, the demands that were coming from the people who would have been enlightened and motivated by that drive that NJAC had placed throughout the nation in demonstrations, in meetings, in pamphlets, with that movement of energy, of example. Right? A movement that was telling our people that regardless of who you are, you have a right to participate. You have a right to be a part. You have a right to be respected, as NJAC sought to respect all comers, regardless of their position, their wealth, their education, their ethnicity. It did not matter. All were respected. And therefore, our people were motivated to the extent that that movement could have pawned the streets of Trinidad and Tobago for 55 days in a nation where people used to talk about a 9-day wonder. And not only that, you look also at the resolve of the population who would have withstood all efforts on behalf of the powers that be to deter, to hamper, and to stop that great movement. And let us just take the declaration of the state of emergency, for instance. When the emergency was declared, the population did not immediately accepted. They came onto the streets, they defied the regulations. In Tobago, I can give the example of what happened. People gathered at the Scarborough car park, and thousands of persons were in the car park. A lot of youths, a lot of students. And that gathering, that rally went on for hours until a detachment of police officers came sometime about 3 o'clock and dispersed. But the point I'm making is that the population didn't just bow and give in. And that was the general picture. However, the people's leaders had been arrested, or at least most of them, because the chief servant was trying to make his way into Port of Spain because he was out. He was still one who was not arrested, but the people's leaders were generally arrested and incarcerated. So that immediate defiance did not last very long. But the public, the population, continued to show that resolve over a period of time. And we saw the example of the attempt on the part of the government to pass the Public Order Act, which would have given them powers, dictatorial powers, and powers to run this country under a virtual state of emergency. Again, notwithstanding the fact that the country was under a state of emergency, the population came out and rejected that public order bill to the extent that it has to be withdrawn. The point being as well that all of these factors, when we put them into their correct perspective, we recognize that this Rededication Day, as we move forward, has the significance in the sense that all of us must continue to enlighten our population, must bring the information back to our population. In 1970, it was a question of unity. Today, that unity has been replaced by the borderline, where members of one district can sometimes cross the street to go into another area without their lives being at risk. And I would like to emphasize that point. I would like to bring an example from the march, the Great March to Charlottesville in 1970, where thousands of persons took part, over 10,000 persons. And a devious plot was put in motion by the powers that be. The police were instructed to allow the demonstration to go forward until it reached the precipice above Bad Rock, just before you descend into Kendall. And at that point, they moved into action, bore their sirens with their vehicles in front of the demonstration, and said, you can go no further. The question is, why let people walk 16 miles, only 11 more to reach Charlottesville? Then you intervene in a most critical place, Bad Rock, where if there was any untoward incident, you could almost be sure that persons were going to go over that 200-foot precipice. What was even more diabolical is the fact that they spoke about bringing up reinforcements for that demonstration, which was the largest in Tobago in 1970. They brought up a majority of Indian policemen, hoping that with that conflict between the Indians and the Africans, Indian policemen against African demonstrators, you would have created a divide in the two major races almost permanently. My time is about up, but all I would say is that that question of unity was powerful and led to a lot of the achievements of 1970, it has to be on the agenda and it has to be promoted by all of us as we reflect on 50 years of the Trinidad and Tobago revolution and the Black Power movement. Thank you.
So there's just speaking on your mic, muted.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, no, your mic was muted.
Oh, muted. Oh, very sorry. I'm very sorry. Well, thank you very much, Brother Kamban. But thank you also very much, Brother Mbao Mohini, for giving us the significance and relevance of this rededication day. One of the points you made, which I want to endorse, is that according to Brother Dagger, young and old all belong to this new society. And from your talk, we understand that all of us must continue to educate our society wherever we are. I want to tell Brother Mohini, and I want to tell all of you who are listening, that we have some listeners in St. Croix who called me this morning and said they are listening. We have some people in St. Croix listening to us right now. We have people from the University of the Virgin Islands who are listening to us. We have a few in New York. And all of them are hearing your message, and all of them are participating in today's rededication day, a very important day. If I can say something, I want to tell all of you, and I want to tell Brother Mohini this especially, that the very last time I spoke to Brother Dagger, he was telling me that he wants to have Brother Mohini at the University of Trinidad and Tobago doing his master's and his doctorate. And he told me that make sure that Brother Mohini come and do this course. So I want to tell Brother Mohini again that the offer is still due, it's still there, and anytime he wants to come, I'm sure we'll welcome him. I'm also sure that Brother Sweet will welcome you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me move on then now to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Sister Josanne Leonard. She's the daughter of a great trade unionist and activist, Mr. Winston Leonard, who was activist of he was with the Education and Research Officer of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. That's where she got her DNA from. She's a veteran radio and television broadcaster, also producer, and her emphasis is on entertainment. That's where I knew her. And she has worked over the years with clients and affiliates from all parts of the Caribbean, the USA, and Europe. She has a wide network of contacts when it comes to entertainment. She was the founder of this group called Insight, the Institute for Culture, Innovation, Technology, and Enterprise Insight. And at one time, she served as an independent consultant. She founded her own Mirabai Communications. She served as a consultant director with COT one time, and she was a board member of the Worldwide Independent Music Network. Very, very wide, very well educated, very, very knowledgeable. This afternoon, she's going to talk about protecting and preparing the youth. Protect and prepare the youth. Sister Josanne Leonard. I suppose you didn't hear me. Leonard? Yeah.
Let's just continue with the other person. We'll come back to Miss Leonard.
Okay. We'll come back to Miss Leonard. We'll come back to Miss Leonard. So she joined us just now. We continue the program, and I want to move on to Dr. Kafra Kambon. Dr. Kafra Kambon will be next, our next speaker. I think everybody knows Dr. Kambon, but if those of you who don't know Dr. Kambon, let me just tell you that just last year, his name came up at university, and we thought at the university that this man who has done so much for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of not only being a participant, but in 2019 we felt that he deserved, because of his work, he deserved a doctorate, and we crowned him with a doctorate at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He was one of the leaders of the National Joint Action Committee in 1970, studied economics at the University of the West Indies. He's one of the pioneers of the Emancipation Support Committee, president for years, and he founded the CAFSHARA services, served in field research, and they are very prominent in field research and in data analysis and in human impact assessments. He was the regional coordinator, he still is, I think, the regional coordinator of the Caribbean Pan-African Network. I remember him serving in the Reparations Committee. And in 2009, he was the permanent representative to the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council of the African Union, talking for the Caribbean. And for those of us who are authors and who are readers, will know that his book, one of the outstanding books he has written for us to understand our struggle, is that book on George Weeks, that political biology of George Weeks, and entitled Bread, Justice, and Freedom, Political Biography of George Weeks. So without any more ado, I want to bring to the virtual podium Dr. Kafra Kambon. And he will be talking about 1970 and its impact on economic development. Dr. Kambon.
Thank you very much, Professor and Brother Hollis Liverpool. And let me say thanks to UTT as well as the National Joint Action Committee for having me on this forum, especially as it's on this significant rededication day, which I did not even realize until I heard it said. And our brother moderator was very much a part of the revolution as well, because you had a few Calypsonians whom I'd never forget, because the way they lent their voices to the raising of consciousness and sustenance of consciousness in this society. And one of them was our brother Hollis Liverpool, has joined us. Goes into that, along with people like Brother Valentino, Stallion, relator, composer, and I think it's important to say that when we are talking about 1970, the role of the artist. Now, I've been asked to speak about the economic impact of the movement itself. And that is something that I have some familiarity with, but you would not hear too much economics from me this afternoon. I was an economist a few decades ago. I don't consider myself an economist now. I wouldn't dare consider myself an economist now. So let me deal with this. As a result of the Black Power movement 50 years ago, the government implemented a program of economic reform, which included the creation of a substantial state enterprise sector. In recent years, very sad for people like myself, and I'm sure a lot of those on this platform, we have seen and we are continuing to see a rapid decline in this sector, which we saw as the makings of a people's sector, not just a state sector. A writer in the National Workers Union website pointed out, his name is Godfrey Winston, I'm quoting him here, from 1970 to 1986, the PLM government, and it's significant he says government, owned and controlled approximately 67 state enterprises that engage in primary, secondary, and tertiary production of goods and services. As those of you who have some background about this country and where we stood economically would know, one of the causes championed by the Black Power movement of 1970 was the issue of ownership and control of the commanding heights of the economy in Trinidad and Tobago, national ownership and control. At that time, the economy was dominated by giants from the oil sector. The sugar industry was British Tate and Lyle, the banking sector. In fact, not only did we not have ownership of the banking sector, we could not even get low-level jobs in the banking sector before 1970. But from 1970 to 1986, the PLM government established ownership and controlled approximately 67 state enterprises that engage in primary, secondary, and tertiary production of goods and services. That is a dramatic change in the economy. Now, on the other hand, almost everything is for sale. And I will refer people to the website of the National, I think it's, National Workers Union, and look for that writer, Godfrey Vincent, because there you would see details of what I'm talking about. I don't have to go into the details, but he lists things about the situation that we have found ourselves in and the kinds of reversals. So we have gone through decades of induced amnesia, which, despite the outcries of a few, a lot of them radical trade unionists, leave us undisturbed at a mass level by the sellout of our national enterprises. And that is a kind of massive change in our psyche that we have undergone in the decades after 1970. And perhaps part of the psychological problem is that because of the way enterprises were set up and run, we didn't really see them as our enterprises. We continued and continue to see them as state enterprises. So there's a psychological separation between the enterprises and ourselves. The creation of a substantial state sector in the society was in large measure an outcome of the Black Power movement of 1970. Now, demands for the state to take over enterprises did not begin with the Black Power movement, but the Black Power movement had the capacity to move that forward. And it also embraced many of the people within its ranks who were calling for a long time for the nationalization of major enterprises in the country. It was a movement which brought together university students, trade unions, grassroots organizations, and other organizations and individuals with a radical bent. Some university lecturers, played important roles, like Dr. Brinsley Samaru. I don't know if he's on yet. I understand he's supposed to be on this. And students as well at the university played an important part. Because of the nature of our society, Black Power became a powerful mobilization tool and ideology. It was a basis for ideological development for many reasons. And I'll just in brief say, the historical base on which our society developed after the coming of Columbus to the region. The savage conquest of the indigenous peoples by Europe, which followed. The barbaric links created with Africa through conquests, human trafficking, and the development of the most barbaric and inhuman societies in recorded human history. Chattel slavery was followed by another brutal system, Indian indentureship, which, though not as dehumanizing as African enslavement, was another of Europe's international crimes for which there must be a reckoning. Against this background, psychologically and culturally, economic status became entangled with concepts of racial hierarchy, including with color of skin as a highly visible basis of separation and evaluation of human beings. Up to the present, racism remains embedded in the economic structure, as in fact it does in the psychological and cultural dimensions of the society, influencing relationships not only between Black and white, but in a particularly detrimental way between Africans and Indians in particular. Ideologically and practically, Black power took on the challenge of addressing not only the economic structures of oppression, but the psychological and cultural factors which diminished our confidence to challenge the control of the commanding heights of the economy and separated the two major ethnic groups in the society, Africans and Indians. In challenging the economic structures, we were reinforced by the research, the teaching and perspectives of a group that was called the New World Group, which was led by economists and other scholars like Lloyd Best, Norman Govan, George Beckford, and C.Y. Thomas. You also had Carrie Levitt, a Canadian woman who made contributions to the radical line of thought which had been embraced by some of the students at UWI. And this was one of the underlying factors in the role that students played. The New World Group was an important part of the influencing thought in that period of the late 1960s. So this made the connection between students, as students became radicalized, created a connection between students and radical trade unions. And when the National Joint Action Committee was formed and named at first the Joint National Action Committee, was formed at the University of the West Indies, and it's significant that members of grassroots organizations, major trade unions in the country, and so became a part of it, because the radicalized students were very much involved in trade union issues. And the trade unions were really spearheading a lot of the mass struggle in the country in the late 1960s. In fact, it is significant that when trade unions marched against the introduction of the Industrial Stabilization Act in 1968, that you had students from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, who were part of that march. That was something quite significant. And when in 1969, you had a bus strike, which was a challenge to the ISA, which was now in force, you find that university students, including Ayegoro Ome, who is part of this discussion today, the late Makanda Daga, and so, and were part of the discussions leading up to the bus strike, and also were among those arrested during that bus strike. So what I developed was a very strong connection, a very strong relationship between the university students and the radical trade union movement. And so you had two groups which were both advocates for the question of nationalization of the major industries of the country. And it got further popularization because of the ability of the National Joint Action Committee to communicate with a broad cross-section of the society. Because of the popular appeal of the Black Power movement, the way in which its ideological projections, with messages that both embraced and went beyond the material, messages that were psychologically empowering, and that is significant, you know, it was not just the economics, messages that were psychologically empowering, awakened a suppressed self-consciousness and the self-confidence and ethnic pride. And that led to an escalation of the demand for ownership and control of the commanding heights of the economy. In fact, that demand became overwhelming. It confronted those with power with their failure to take the independent struggle to the next level. Eric Williams, with his grasp of history, probably understood the significance of the moment and the just demands of the movement, which he eventually suppressed for his own survival. But while he jailed leaders and soldiers, and later had to deal with an armed grassroots movement, he precipitated the state into nationalizations of the commanding heights of the economy, and even the creation of many new state enterprises. Against this background, we, people like myself, like Aigoro and Mbau and so, I'm sure, can feel a deep hurt of where our economic ownership and control went and where it is headed today. Again, I would refer people to the website I spoke about of the workers, that workers union, and the article, another article, because there are a series of articles on the economy by Godfrey, and I would refer people to that again. So from 1970, so I just want to make a concluding statement of the importance of the philosophical basis, the ideological basis on which ideas are communicated. Because to me, that is what gave the power of a call for nationalization and control of the economy that was not new. What gave it its power is the ideological framework, the emotional appeal of that, the way it got into what people felt inside of them, the way in which it changed their concepts of self and their concepts of the world, made them feel different, made us all feel different about ourselves. The way in which it was able to bring communities that were at loggerheads with each other, the African and Indian communities together under the banner of Black Power. And that is something highly significant because nobody, even a number of Africans, didn't want to have the label Black. And to be able to have a movement called Black Power and bring the groups together in some very practical forms of unity was very significant. And I could refer to just two of the incidents. One is the Charoni March, which Badis Maharaj, who was the Hindu leader at the time, tried his best to prevent, and it came off very successfully. And then on April 21st, the day on which a state of emergency that was the last, I think, 8 months was declared. It was at a time when Makandal Daga and other members of NJAC were in the South, along with Winston, Leonard, and Nuevo Diaz, and so on. And they were there to join a march on April 21st, to lead a march on April 21st. It was a march of sugar workers who had discarded Padis Maharaj, ran him when he came to try to speak to them when they went on strike at Caroni Limited, Nile then. And what is significant is that the reason they ended up there is that 3 days before, when we were having a meeting at the headquarters of the National Joint Action Committee in Belmont, 3 sugar workers, 1 African brother, 2 Indian brothers, came to the headquarters and asked us to come and intervene in their dispute in the sugar industry, which was not just with Tate and Lyle, but also with their union leader, Padis Maharaj. And that, in fact, was probably the trigger. You know, the fact that you would have, in March, you had a movement from the north to central and south of predominantly African people marching with an appeal of unity to Indians. And now you're having a reverse march with Indians from all over the sugar belt, from way down deep south coming up to the central Trinidad, who were coming on the return march. They were to be joined by WASA workers and a number of other workers. WASA workers, by PTSC workers who were going on strike again, the bus company workers, and a number of other workers on their way into Port of Spain. And that is when the government struck. But at least they had to try to follow the programs that were advocated by the National Joint Action Committee, and that involved the nationalization of industries, the beginning of an important process, and it is our duty now to see that it is not completely turned around. Thank you.
I had a crowd in front of me. I would ask them to give you a special round of applause, Brother Campbell, for helping us to understand better, those of us who didn't know, to understand better the ideas spread from the Black Power movement and its impact on people. I hope students are listening, and I hope those who didn't know are understanding. Thank you very much, Brother Campbell, that some of these ideas awaken the consciousness of the people. As you said, Calypsonians, and I can endorse that, because many Calypsonians found ideas for singing calypsos, and not just ideas to sing calypsos, Brother Campbell, but ideas to fashion their calypsos. Some of them change their mood in the calypso world, or superior, etc. Good. Thank you also for stressing the changes in the economy, the fact that the Black Power movement moved persons to the nationalization and control of many of our resources and our economic resources. And above all, that the Black Power movement was a mobilization tool for many students, for many lecturers, and for many of our trade unionists. Thank you again for reminding us of these things. Ladies and gentlemen, then I move on now, ladies and gentlemen, to Sister Lizelle Dagger, the wife of the chief servant, Macandal Dagger, Brother Macandal Dagger, deceased. For those of you who don't know, Lizelle Dagger was in fact, she's the longest serving female member in the National Joint Action Committee. And they said that it is said that every good leader has a good lady or good woman behind him, and certainly I'm sure she was one of the motivators of Dagger. Lizelle is not only just the wife, but she bore him 4 children, and she was the former president of the National Women's Action Committee. She was also the former president of the Institute of Race Relations, and she was the editor of the Caribbean, and I think she still is the editor of the Caribbean Women magazine. In 1990, the Express newspaper named Lizelle Dagger as one of the 100 most outstanding women of the nation. She definitely is. And besides having 4 children for Macandal, she served the National Joint Action Committee in several conferences and fora, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but overseas. She served for many, many years also as a servant president of the National Joint Action Committee. I'm very happy, and it's a privilege for me to bring to the virtual microphone Sister Lizelle Dagger, and she's going to talk to you about respecting and elevating the woman. Women are very, very important in 1970. Women were very, very important in the fight with Butler, and women certainly are important in any fight in Trinidad and Tobago. So Sister Lizelle Dagger, respect and elevate the woman. Take the mic, Sister Dagger.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hollis Liverpool, our moderator. I also wish to recognize servant leader.
Please start. Please put on your video.
Video.
Can I continue?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes. Good. Thank you very much. Our moderator, Dr. Hollis Liverpool, our servant leader of NJAC, fellow presenters, online viewers, brothers and sisters. Greetings. I would like to pay respect to our past revolutionary leaders and members who have passed on to the realm of the ancestors. It is an honor to speak on behalf on the contribution made by the women of our nation to the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970. Within the revolution, women worked alongside the men in all areas of National Joint Action Committee's work. We were represented on all committees. We were not only present in demonstrations, but also involved in mobilization, zonal committee building, communications, education, social and community activities. The women's arm of NJAC was in the formative stages during the time of the demonstrations of 1970. I recall attending a meeting chaired by Sister Olabisi Koboni, at the home of the Ogaro family in the East Dry River area, up the hill, 1 or 2 weeks before the first state of emergency was declared. There were discussions on the development of the mass movement with the emphasis on the methods of mobilization and development of women. It was also noted that there was an increasing presence at that time of more mature women within the demonstrations. Plans were discussed for a supportive fundraising event at Sister Rosetta Adams' home in Woodbrook at that meeting. These formative meetings would not only lay the foundation of the women's organization, but also the women's crucial contribution to NJAC's development. During both states of emergency, 1970 and 71, the women would become the clandestine line of communication between the NJAC leadership, most of whom were in detention, and the leaders and members of the area committees. This enabled NJAC to continue its operations during the states of emergency with the guidance of its leadership and the coordination of NJAC's women's arm. The women accomplished this while also maintaining contact and support for families of those detained. Some members of the women's arm also faced the challenge of working while under the heavy surveillance of the state's armed forces. After the state of emergency in 1970, and when the detainees were released, the NJAC leadership remobilized their membership by firstly having community and area meetings. After the rededication day, December 12th, the NJAC leadership invited selected representatives to attend its first leadership course, which I recall was started on the December the 20th of that year. This had the effect of empowering the selected women with the training and tools needed to step forward at both zonal and national levels of NJAC's organization structure. Within months, women were represented in all the committees with more responsibilities and played important roles in building the comprehensive structure of the People's Organization, NJAC. Throughout the 1970s, the women were involved in mobilization at the area, zonal, national levels of NJAC and its women's arm. While under constant police harassment, the Women's Arm had as its mandate to mobilize and educate the women of Trinidad and Tobago. We were active in all NJAC's endeavors and contributed to the Liberation newspaper and area and zonal periodic newsletters. The women of NJAC addressed many social issues, including labor issues, equality of opportunity, and equal remuneration of women, physical and psychological violence against women and children, which we see prevalent today again, effects of stress and the evaluation of the holistic approach to life, critical care needed for the aged, and in some areas, climate change, its effect on land, agriculture, and so on. Women's groups were organized at the area levels and established links with progressive groups regionally and internationally. As early as 1971, the Women's Arm hosted a meeting of representatives from Caribbean women's organizations and worked with these organizations to establish plans for the development of women across the Caribbean. The work of the Women's Arm was reflected in its newspaper, Woman Rising, and its magazine, Black Woman, which addressed critical issues in women's development and the family. We used these publications at that time, they were sold during house-to-house engagements for individuals in discussions that educated people on national, regional, international issues and events. The Women's Arm also hosted events such as market days, rallies, and so on to encourage local farming, cottage industries, cultural art form, etc. We also use these rallies to honor women who had contributed to the communities and to the nation's development. By the 1980s, the NJAC's Women's Arm had begun a new mandate for the preparation of women for national responsibility. Women were among the NJAC candidates to contest the TNT general elections. This provided an opportunity and a platform to address the national community on matters critical to our nation's development and to educate the population on a range of issues. The Women's Arm changed the political landscape of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by demanding that all parties contesting the elections ensure at least 25% of the candidates presented were women. This would establish the importance of the woman's contribution on critical issues of government, encourage the discussion of women's issues on the campaign trail, and put center stage the importance of proper representation of women in all areas of development. After that period, NJAC's women continued this work in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. Women were represented in NJAC's teams, which visited the other islands and participated in post-election media conferences in these islands. Our women also presented papers at regional conferences in Barbados, Grenada, Cuba, Guyana, Antigua, St. Vincent, and at international conferences held in Canada, USA, Hungary, Russia, and in Nicaragua. We use these opportunities to establish contact with women's groupings from many countries. The Women's Arm also invited and hosted representatives from the Caribbean, from Latin America, USA, India, and Africa, including representatives of South Africa's ANC, at our national, regional, and international seminars and consultations. All this work served to fulfill the Women's Arm's mandate to educate and mobilize women to ensure the elevation and respect of women, while encouraging them to prepare themselves to fulfill their national responsibility. To facilitate this development with women, the Women's Arm held special developmental workshops seminars, and courses of various lengths, generally between 6 weeks to 6 months. The response was overwhelming from the women as participants and from those who were requested to lecture. From university, the public sector, religious and national leaders, professionals in the private sector. The seminars, workshops, and courses cover topics in human development, in women's development, education, women's representation, parenting, health, politics, the arts, etc. The most comprehensive course, in conjunction with the Butler Institute, that lasted for 6 months, was entitled Women and Leadership, and was by far the most effective one and well attended. The courses were usually offered simultaneously in North and South Trinidad and in Tobago. In the area of culture, NJAC's Women's Arm is most associated with the annual National Calypso competition. We received the franchise and after we established the National Women's Action Committee in the early 1980s. We developed this into a developmental program for women in our Calypso art form. Beside the competition, NWAC also held seminars and Calypso Queens in Concert events that address the artistic development of these female artists. In addition, NJAC honored women from the arts each year, thus celebrating the achievement of female artists while inspiring those in the art form to aim for excellence. Over the years, NWAC has contributed much to the revolution and the development of our women and nation. The women of NJAC have received many accolades through the years, but the greatest one perhaps has been the evolution and development of our women and our nation. In fact, the history of the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970 has proven that whenever the woman is elevated, the nation will arise. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, 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 Sister Lizelle. I want to thank you very, very much for this talk this afternoon, on this special day. The fact that women played such an important role in 1970. Women were empowered in 1970. Women became representatives in all areas. And you spoke especially about NWAC and the Women's Arm, and you brought back memories, and I'm sure you educated a lot of people this evening for them to understand that in terms of social issues like what is happening today, violence and abuse, all this was done in 1970. Above all, you established in 1970, you established groups throughout the Caribbean through your magazines and through your publications. I remember singing, for example, reading some of those things in 1970 and singing, for example, on women and Black women. I remember that well. And one of the points you made and you established is that Women's Arm changed the landscape, the political landscape of Trinidad and Tobago because through your demands for representation in all areas. And today, whenever we see the National Calypso competition, that has grown by leaps and bounds because of the women. So thank you very much, Sister Lizelle Dagger, for reminding us of the role of women in 1970, and the number of areas in which they took part in, and the number of areas which they contributed handsomely to the development of Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed the Caribbean and many areas out of in foreign countries. Okay. Are you seeing me, Brother Technician, Brother Gansham? I think they have lost me, but I'll try again to get back.
Prof.
Yeah.
We're seeing you. You continue.
Right. You're seeing me well, because I'm not seeing anything. All right. We want to move on now to another great area, but just now Brother Campbell was speaking about the part played by so many people in the revolution of 1970. When he mentioned Professor Brinsley Samaru, what could I say about Professor Brinsley Samaru? One of the most learned persons in the Caribbean in terms of Caribbean history, writing on indentureship, knowledge about the rise of the Indian community, knowledge of the indigenous peoples of Trinidad and Tobago. I am one of his students, in fact, at the University of the West Indies, where he taught me not only Caribbean history, but he taught me European history at the University of West Indies. And for those of you who don't know, Professor Samaru was made professor of history at the University of the West Indies years ago. And besides working as a teacher and lecturer in history, Caribbean history especially, he served as a senator and a member of parliament under the Nile government. And he wrote so many books, Labor Unrest in the Caribbean, 1937, 1938. And he was the head of the history department of the UE, not just lecturer, but head of the department. And he's a UTT man because he served as a postgraduate researcher. When I joined the UTT, he was there as a researcher. He served for many, many years at the University of Trinidad and Tobago as a postgraduate researcher. And he served, as I said, as a minister in the Nile government. Above all, Professor Samaru is a teacher. We gave him one of the most esteemed award, Sunshine Award gave him in the follow years ago as one of the outstanding teachers in the Caribbean. So this afternoon, he'll be talking about 1970 and the quest for national unity in 1970. I bring to the podium, I'm very privileged to bring to the podium, Professor Brinsley Samaru, A Quest for National Unity. All yours, Professor Samaru.
You're hearing me? Are you hearing me now? Gansham, you could have me on?
We're hearing you, yes.
You're hearing me?
Yes.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Choki, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here and to be, nostalgically remembering what happened in 1970. And I'm very glad to see Josanne Leonard, because I remember very much on the lectures that I used to give on the direction of Makandal Daga and Kafra Kambon. She was always there. She was always there sitting next to Beverly Jones. And I have to say the questions that they asked me when I was doing those lectures really sent me back to the books. So I'm very glad that Josanne is here. And I hope she and perhaps Lizelle can do some more work on the number of women that I'm going to talk about, not for 1970, but in the previous, the period before 1970. I'm glad that Brother Kafra Kambon is here today, because on one of the slides that I'll be showing, you will see that I have sort of added to the list of dead and injured in 1937 that he published in Bread, Peace and Justice. I went to London and went through the records there. So you will see in a little while the chart that I have made particularly for this lecture, talking about the martyrs of June 1937. So there are three things I want to do in this lecture. First of all, to spend a few moments in talking about Port of Spain as a center of protest for the last 186 years. That is very important. NJAC and a number of the other groups are based in Port of Spain. And I just want to say how important Port of Spain has been as a symbolic center of authority in Trinbago. So that's the first section, Port of Spain as a center of protest. The second topic on which I'd like to make a few remarks, the national unemployment movement and the Negro welfare, social welfare and cultural association in the labor struggle from 1934. I want you to think of that date, 1934 to 1937. And then I would go on to talk about the nationwide disturbances of June 1937. And I want to talk about the sacrifices that all of those martyrs gave in 1937 37. And as I said, I prepared a particular chart talking about those who were killed and those who were injured, and bringing up to date the total number of those who were killed and injured. Right, so let us talk first of all about Port of Spain in the last 186 years as a center of protest and revolution. First of all, August 1st and 2nd, 1834, when hundreds of enslaved people gathered and marched into Port of Spain from all the surrounding states, confronting the police and creating an enormous riot for 2 days. And why were they rioting? Because they were rioting because it is said in 1834 you have emancipation, but you black people, you Negroes need to be civilized. And so we're going to give you an additional 6 years, the 6-year apprenticeship period. And the Africans in Port of Spain revolted on those 2 days, August 1st and 2nd, 1834. And that protest, coinciding with a number of similar protests in the rest of the Caribbean, shortened the period of apprenticeship. So freedom came in 1838 and not in 1840 as the British had intended. 1849, the torching of the legislative chamber in Port of Spain. Unfortunately, the British were saved because they had a warship in the harbor which came and killed a number of black protesters and injured a number of them. 1881, the Canboulay riots, in which Captain Baker tried to stop the carnival, and we all know about what happened in 1881 when the whole of Port of Spain revolted and Captain Baker and his troops had to withdraw. 1903, mournful Monday, 23rd of March, what the British called by a misnomer water riots. It was no water riots. It was a struggle for emancipation, further emancipation. 23rd of March, the loss of 18 lives, 18 people shot dead, including 5 women. 1934, the National Unemployment Union, NUM, and the sugar disturbances in central Trinidad. This is something that most of us don't know about, but I want to talk about that. 1935, NUM becomes NWSCA, National Unemployment Movement, becomes National Welfare, Social and Cultural, Negro Welfare, Social and Cultural Association. So that's 1934 and 35. 1937, NWSCA leadership in the very important disturbances. And of course, finally, the Black Power uprising in 1970. So I just want to suggest that the capital city, because it is the symbolic center of authority where decisions are made, has been and will continue to be a center of protest and revolution in Trinbago. So let us talk first of all 1934 to 1937. 1934, the formation of NUM, National Unemployment Union, led by Elmer Francois, Jim Barrett, and James Ashby. 1934-35, they join, that is important, they join with the sugar workers in central Trinidad. July 1934, more than 200 sugar workers gather in Couva, but they are in contact with NUM in Port of Spain, and they decide to plan a march into Port of Spain to present their case again to the government. In June and July, there are these very serious disturbances in the sugar estates in central Trinidad. They join up with NUM, and there is one Indian woman who leads these disturbances in central Trinidad. Her Indian name is Pulbasi, which in Hindi means a flower on the surface of a pond. But NUM gave her the name Naidu. So when one is interviewing people who are familiar with the thing, you can't ask them about Pulbasi. You have to ask them the name that NUM gave her, which is Naidu. And people in NUM were so educated, so well abreast of what was happening, that they took this name of Sarojini Naidu, who was an Indian freedom fighter, who came from a very wealthy Indian family, but dedicated the rest of her life spending time in jail and so on, in fighting for the cause of women, cause of people in the diaspora. So that Elmer Francois and NUM gave to Pulbasi the name Naidu, by which he is known in history. And that is a very important event. In July 1934, NUM, Naidu, and the sugar workers decide to march into Port of Spain. But fortunately, they are saved because this colonial secretary, Howard Nankivel, went down to Cuba and stopped them from marching, because he understood quite clearly that if they had come into Port of Spain, there would have been a shooting and a number of them would have been killed. But that is important, the nexus between a predominantly African organization, NUM, and a predominantly Indian organization led by Naidu in July 1934. Okay, so let us come back now to talk about the 22nd of June 1937, in which there is a large march in Port of Spain. A lot of us talk about Renzi, and we talk about Butler, and we talk about what is happening in the South. We don't talk about what was happening, what did happen. 22nd of June, Port of Spain is under shutdown. I don't know if Gansham can put up that particular chart where I have given that information. So on the 22nd of June, the shutdown of Port of Spain. Right, I have it there. And if you look on the 22nd of June in Port of Spain, the very last one where I have, but that updates what Kafra Kambon had done about the 1937. So there I have updated, giving the dates of all the protests, the number dead, the number injured, why I have been able to get the names of dead and injured. I've put them there. So that is a useful guide for all of us. Right, so if you look on the 22nd in Port of Spain, nobody was killed, but one person was injured, and 54 people were arrested in Port of Spain. That I don't have, but that is certainly a fact. So on the 22nd of June, there are marches around the Red House, up and down Frederick Street, General Hospital. The dock workers refused to load a load of sugar that is geared for going abroad, because Trinidad was a major exporter of sugar at that time. And then in the afternoon, at about 3 o'clock, at least 500 marches in Port of Spain, led by Elmer Francois, led by the NWSCA with a red flag, gather at the railway station, which is now where the bus terminal is, because they have got word that the British government is about to dispatch 10,000 rounds of bullets to San Fernando to quell the riots in San Fernando. And therefore there is this enormous meeting in San Fernando. They block the sending of the ammunition. The crowd is addressed by Elmer Francois and others, Jim Barrett, James Ashby. And for those of you who want to see a description of what happened on that particular day, I would refer you to a book written by a French Creole, R.A.C. Boisier de Boisier, who was a young man at that time and who witnessed what happened. And there he has elaborated on it, Crown Jewel. That's the name of the book, in which he has the full role of Elmer Francois, whom he calls Miss Walcott. He doesn't say Elmer Francois, he calls her, so he just changed the name. But for those of you who want to get a good idea of what happened on that 22nd of June in Port of Spain, you should read that book published by R.A.C. de Boisier, Crown Jewel. As I said, he was there, so he saw exactly what happened. So there are 54 people who are arrested. And then in the months that follow, a number of others are arrested. Jim Barrett is given 4 months for sedition. Elmer Francois is tried, and they drag on the trial for about 6 months. She's the only woman, the first and only woman to be tried on a charge of sedition. And what was the sedition all of them were charged for? I tell you what was the sedition. Walking around with pamphlets saying, "Free Butler. Butler must not spend a day in jail." That was the sedition. That is why they were, so many of them were arrested and charged. Darlington Marshall, one of the members of NWCIC, again charged and jailed. So what are the results of what happened in June 1937? It is the first demonstration of Afro-Indian solidarity, where the Africans and the Indians united on a class rather than a race basis. That's point one. We could discuss that later on. Secondly, it was an important time for the emergence of women. That is very important. And you know, if you want to replace some of the names of women, British women whose names adorn our places like Lady Young Road and Lady Chancellor Road, we should change those names and put the names of people like Daisy Crick, Adelaide Harrison, Ursula Gittins, Christina King, and a brave woman in Rio Claro. As you can see in Rio Claro, 5 were killed and 20 were injured. I have the names of 4 of those who were killed. I couldn't get the 5th one. But among the people arrested was one very brave woman called Josephine Charles. And Josephine Charles was arrested and she was jailed for a year. And the magistrate in jailing her insulted her in a most undignified way. When a woman decides to play man, then she becomes a criminal. So I'm going to jail you for 12 months. So you must remember that name, Josephine Charles. We must remember the hundreds of Baptist women in South Trinidad who were ardent followers of Uriah Butler and who constituted so much of the crowds and the revolt that took place on the 19th and 20th in the South. In fact, one commentator says that it was the women who threw petrol on Charlie King and burnt him to death. So that is very important. I think that is one of the things that NWAC and people like Josanne Leonard and so on should be highlighting, the role of so many of these women who were very crucial in the success of what happened in 1937. And then another important achievement of that period was the legitimization of trade union movements. Before 1937, you could not have trade unions, you know, in the manner that we had from 1937. So in 1937, as a result of these disturbances, you have OWTU with Renzi as president, All Trinidad, again 1937, 1938, All Trinidad Workers Front, President Renzi, the Secretary Atkinson, All Trinidad Transport and General Workers Union, the SWWTU, Printers Union, Amalgamating Building and Woodworking Union, Civil Service Association, formed in December 1938. So the point I am making is that 1937 opens up a very important era in the history of Trinbago, in that it makes possible the legitimization of trade union, which people had been demanding, you know, long before, but the British wouldn't allow it. 1938 forces the formation of trade union. 1937 shows demonstrates the remarkable bravery of so many of the members of the working class against the biggest empire at that time, and the biggest empire that the world ever knew, and that is the mighty British Empire. To them, oil and sugar was very, very important at that time. And here you have these people standing up against them, sacrificing lives and limbs, as I've said. so many of them being arrested and jailed. So it is remarkable that we should bear in mind the sacrifices of all of those who gave their lives, gave their careers up in order so the rest of us would be freed. The final point I want to make is that 1937 represents a very important stage in the battle against South African domination of the oil industry. The largest employer in the oil industry in 1937 was TLL, Trinidad Leaseholds Limited. As the largest employer, Trinidad Leaseholds Limited owned the refinery in Pointe-a-Pierre. They owned all the oil fields in Guayguayari, Barrackpore Forest Reserve, and so the largest employer. And they brought the precise South African, it is a South African company, I'm telling you, which moves from mining of minerals to the mining of oil, because they made a lot of money on black labor in South Africa, which money is now invested in Trinidad. And here they have come to Trinidad to use exactly the South African methods of dealing with those whom they call niggers, but the black people stood up to them. And that was one of the triumphs I'm suggesting of 1937. So I think I've gone beyond my time, so I'll end now. But if you need any further elaboration on any of these things that I've said, I'd be quite willing to do that, afterwards in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Samaru. Whenever I hear Professor Samaru, you get that sense of history, especially Caribbean history. Professor Samaru always talks about the kind of history that from down under that some people don't look at. I just completed a book on Butler, and you raised my paws in terms of all those fights won by Elmer Francois and Paul Bassi and Josephine Charles, etc. Above all, you spoke about the demonstrations of African Indian unity, starting from 1937, and we are glad for that. And I hope all the people, all the participants, and all the listeners are taking note of that. I hope they ask you questions. I hope they ask many questions. The sacrifices of workers, the battle against South Africa starting in 1937. I'm so happy to have you, Professor Samuel. All of us are happy to have you, because whenever you speak, as I said, we learn so much. NEM, fight with the sugarcane workers, and that the unity that was struck not only in 1934 and 37, but also in 1970. I move on now, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. I can't see you, but I know you can see me and you can hear me. I'm going to move on now to Sister Josanne Leonard, the Mr. just now. But again, she continues to be, she's one of those persons from 1937 that after 1937, OWT was formed, and her father, Winston Leonard, became one of the education and research officers of the OWTO, stamping her DNA in the struggle. And she has always been a struggler, fighting, always fighting. She's a veteran radio and television broadcaster, I mentioned just now, also a producer, and she focuses on entertainment. She worked with clients here and overseas, throughout the Caribbean, the USA, and Europe. A wide network of contacts she had. Founder of Insight, independent consultant, founder of the Meribay Communications, stress and festival planning, project management, all these are her areas. And she served as a consultant director, in fact, with COT, the Corporate Organization of Trinidad and Tobago. And she's a member, she was a board member of the Worldwide Independent Music Network. This evening, we are evening now. This evening now, she continues to educate us, and she will talk in terms of 1970. She'll be speaking on protecting and preparing the youth. So I bring you to the podium, the virtual podium. I bring to you Sister Josanne Leonard.
Very much, Hollis, and a very good afternoon to all of the my fellow panelists and to the audiences on the various platforms. I actually wanted to kind of send a sign to say, please let Brinsley continue, because I'm sure he had to cut himself, and it was like a history lesson, and he didn't get to 1970, and I know that his remit was the period 1937 to 1970. So I'm quite prepared, Brinsley, to concede with the chair, through the chair, 6 more minutes for you to sort of bring it more to the topic at hand. I'm very happy to do that because I think it's really important.
Yeah, why don't you wait till afterwards? So, you know, in the question, because people might have other questions that they want to ask me.
Yeah,
because I'm really very full of information. So why don't we leave it till afterwards?
You may have questions and you can join the question with answering that also.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Like Liseli, I would like to take just a passing moment to commemorate all of the brothers and sisters coming out of this period who have gone on, including my dad and my mom, and to recognize the immense contribution that they have made. I feel like it's a kind of misnomer to ask me to talk about youth because I'm a kind of old woman now myself. But I know that the intent is obviously to make the connection with that watershed period, 1970. And I think it's going to be, for all intents and purposes, maybe repeating a lot of what we tend to share almost annually about that particular period. Of course, the National Organization of Revolutionary Students, well, I mean, my situation was probably a little more unique in the sense that, as Hollis alluded to, with Dad being so involved in working class politics, social justice, coming into NJAC was a natural pivot as it sought to galvanize the progressive voices and activists in the country and by extension the region. But the thing when I think about young people, if I have to share, and I'm assuming because this is the University of Trinidad and Tobago, I'm assuming that we're not talking to necessarily people of my age and older, but that we're talking with students, students of history and just maybe the general student population. I think a lot, what I'd like to convey has to do with a lot of what has been touched on before by Kafra, Liseli, Mbao, and Kafron captured it when he talked about what he thought was a distinguishing feature. It was not just about protest or another movement. It was the sort of philosophical underpinning. And sometimes when we use that word, people think, well, you kind of, up in some kind of starry-eyed kind of something that has nothing to do with reality. But as a young person in that period and having the benefit of being in a very conscious home, yes, but it was very apparent, and it was, one could not miss the sort of sense of a fire in the belly, in the consciousness of people, even people who were not maybe politicized in the way that some of us may have been politicized or were being politicized. People were being impacted by what was taking place in the country, and a kind of, I would describe it as a kind of hopefulness, as opposed to what we're experiencing now with a kind of helplessness and a sense of doom and gloom. So I think that young people, and I'll talk just a little bit about students in the secondary school system, because of course we were not in a university, we were in the secondary school system. And NORS came out of NJAC, but it was not singular, or it was not just rooted to NJAC, because there were many young people around the country, and not just Port of Spain, and its environs, Tobago, Deep South, San Fernando, and so, where young people were mobilizing, they were reading, they were interested. We didn't have the internet, of course, we didn't have social media, but yet there was this curiosity. And it was reflected in so many ways. It was reflected in going to meetings. It was reflected in participating in marches. It was reflected in the kind of literature that we were reading. And again, not with the kind of access that we've seen post in the sort of neoliberal phase, the 80s coming through, with internet and with a lot more information, or the information superhighway, so to speak. So that it underscores then that there was what was happening in the society was impacting young people, but I think as well that young people were being motivated, young people were being inspired to question the notion of independence. Maybe we weren't articulating it in that sort of intellectual way then, but it was very clear that 8 years after independence, and the period, that period of the mid to late 60s, where the trade union movement and intellectuals were at the forefront of change and challenging the status quo as not delivering on the promise of independence, that it seemed natural that young people at the time would be impacted by what was going on. I want to give much credit and credence to a lot of the people who just very quietly were sharing their ideas, were mobilizing in schools, were taking on issues as well in the education system. And maybe if we're amongst a lot of students, one school in particular stands out in my memory and must get commendation, and that is Woodbrook Secondary in Port of Spain. There were other schools like Tranquility and students at Belmont, but Woodbrook Secondary had a particularly progressive group of students in Form 4 and Form 5 who were actually engaging within the context of the classroom. They were engaging with questions about the interpretation of history, what was being taught. And they were aided and abetted with a few teachers and so who were around and who gave guidance and who sort of had groundings with them. But I think it was indicative of being impacted, but being impacted in a way in which they sought themselves to that curiosity and that desire to want something more than what was presented as the prescription. We had become independent, and so we were now masters of our own destiny, which was not so. A lot of what was undertaken during that time was questioning what was being taught in the classroom. And in fact, there was a consultation held down in Chaguaramas. I think it may have been 72 or 73, where the principal of CIC was Father Leefook, would have been one of the persons appointed by Dr. Williams. And it was to look at reformation of the education system, which of course after that we got senior second, junior second, senior sec, as well as greater recognition of VOC training, technical skills and vocational training. And the students of that incarnation of NORS were very, very involved in interrogating what was being taught and actually formulating positions to present to this commission, this national consultation on education. And the story goes that because there were maybe some known suspects in there that may not have been let in or would be branded as troublemakers, that students who were empathetic, like from the more prestigious schools like Holy Name and so, were the ones who sort of championed the presenting of the papers. So, I mean, I think these kinds of anecdotal, if you will, are very important to posit to this generation of young people who are, I guess, responding in their own way. But I think, in all fairness to them, maybe with a disconnect. Before I use up all my time, I do want to, I know that one of the things that sort of catapulted us into, if you will, national recognition or prominence was the Free Our Soldiers campaign. And, I'm reminded Rex LaSalle and Rafiq Shah religiously every year, they send emails and they note the level of support, mobilization and agitation of us in the secondary school system with that Free Our Soldiers campaign. In fact, Rex sent me something the other day, where you see the long swath of history, and Dr. Sam Brinsley being an historian, where he sent me a link to something where so many years after Martin Luther King, they've just turned up this this information about a group of young women in the secondary school system, in the college system, who were 13 and 14 and 15, who were actually part of the whole movement, who were jailed, who were taken up by the police in very much the same way that we were. Another one of those things that's not well known. And I saw the recent launch of the John LaRose and Lennox Pear Foundation. And, you know, it really brought a tear to my eye because, I mean, Lennox Pear was Uncle Lennox to people like me. He was such a stalwart for all the work that he did before, but certainly where we were concerned, because we were arrested in Woodbrook, at Woodbrook Secondary. Uncle Lennox was he was one of the advising attorneys. George Bowron was another, and I can't remember who else. And we're trying at this point to find, of course, they would have sealed those records because we would have been underage. So we're trying to find out, and we're trying to do the means test as to how we may open those records, because we literally had our day in court. We spoke. I mean, I know I spoke on my own behalf, but he was there with us. You know, he was our legal counsel. There are a number of us who were arrested, but our records were sealed because we were underage. We were minors, so to speak. And again, it's one of those historical things that after all this time, one feels, not me, but maybe others feel comfortable to be able to talk about their experiences of 1970. If I mean, and I'm hoping that questions might come. If I might just fast forward very quickly and give me my signal, however it comes, whether it's on my WhatsApp. I think that, you know, I don't want to be too nostalgic. I've remained as wedded as I can to the founding values of how I have grown in this place, with my dad and being influenced by the movement. As I said in my couple of notes, it's the thing that has given me my moorings. It is the thing that I have held on to through some very pretty challenging and dark times in Trinidad and Tobago, when I think of what we came out of. And it's amazing to me how much, for example, listening to Brinsley, I would have happily forgone talking for any length of time to continue to be made more aware. But it's unfortunate that we have these forums or fora that we indulge ourselves for a period of time, and we don't make the connections. We don't connect the dots to building the Trinidad and Tobago Caribbean citizen on the basis with all of this information and knowledge, self-awareness. In fact, we've done everything through education, and I put this largely at the feet of intelligentsia and of our educational institutions like the University of the West Indies and others, where we have skimmed around. I mean, we sort of take it out every year to commemorate an anniversary, and we have a kind of feel good about it, and we invite all the usual suspects to come and share their experiences, but there is no continuum. There's no sense of this continuum of history and citizen building. And I think the time has come for us 50 years on to question and to challenge the institutions to do a lot better. This is our history. It doesn't matter on which side of history we fell or whose politics we support or don't support. It is important because it is a part of where we are today. And so to me, this would be a challenge. I mean, I thank the University of Trinidad and Tobago for doing this, as has happened in previous events through the university. But the average student in the University of the West Indies does not know what we're talking about. The average student in UTT does not know what we're talking about. The average young person, it's like, Hollis is like the young soca artists and the young calypsonians how they always come out and tell you to go and take music to the world, because they don't know that the Roaring Lion and Attila and all of them had music out in America 100 years ago. So we're doing our countries and we're doing ourselves a grave injustice where our education is failing us. We need re-educating. And part of it may be that the people who have to do the work may be too wedded to a political party or system. And so there is fear, but we have to get over ourselves. We have to get over ourselves and we have to do the work. The Black Lives Matter movement has been positive, but for someone like me, I have seen where people have invited me to be an onlooker in them being experts on the Black Power movement. I mean, I'm telling you, people who would not be caught dead saying Black Power, people who will not be caught dead in an emancipation walk or anything like that, suddenly have become the oracles through which we will now understand what has been going on globally. Something is wrong with that. And lack of documentation, critical thinking through education, because when we think about education, we bring it all the way through to what do we mean by innovation? What do we need by entrepreneurship? What do we mean about building sound businesses, social entrepreneurship and otherwise? It's all linked. And if we don't take it, if we don't posit it there and we just take this out every year or every 10 years or maybe the next one will be 75, then maybe I'll have dentures or maybe I wouldn't even be alive and somebody might be saying something to me, saying something about me. How do we make our history live through our education system? And how do we put it front and burner as part of the civics, part of us understanding our evolution as Trinbagonians and Caribbean people? I think that's a major challenge. It is not insurmountable. And Brinsley, I look forward to maybe getting your guidance on how we might be able to say, for example, share with women. I belong to women's groups, women who have gone before and the mark that they have made in effecting change in the country. So I just want to end by saluting and recognizing not just the leadership, but all of the ordinary people, and certainly my comrades in arms in NORS who are very much a part of making a contribution, which is now in fashion to recognize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Leonard. My chairman would be very angry with me if I didn't tell you that at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, we ensured that we brought history on the curriculum of all the teachers who are now doing their degree, etc. And so preparing to teach. We made sure a few years ago that history and geography is part of them. And he'll be angry with me if I didn't tell you about the Academy of Arts and Affairs.
No, it's not a personal attack, Hollis. It's just, I'm talking about a more universal thing, you know?
Yes, I know, but I want you to understand what we have done. In fact, Brinsley was part of us. Brinsley was part of us. Brinsley worked with us as a researcher for many, many years. And what we do lectures, we do seminars, we do forums, we do all these things. They're trying to teach the people outside. In fact, I just wrote a book on Butler, and one reason I wrote the book on Butler is because when students come to me and I ask them about Butler, all they knew about is Butler Highway. So I have written the book, and I just gave Brinsley a copy.
But you just made my point.
But your point is well taken. Your point is well taken. Obika from NJAC, I brought in Obika to give a whole lecture and whole series of talks on what is happening during the World War II, etc., which he did at UWI. But I want to tell you that your words will not fall on deaf ears because a lot of students are listening right now. UCT students are listening, some UWI students are listening. We have some students in St. Croix from the University of the Virgin Islands that they are listening to you. I hope they ask questions, and I have a few in London all listening. So people are listening, and we hope that, as Brother Mutema said, and Mbao said, we have to continue. This rededication day is a day for us. We have to pick up the fight again and go again. So thanks a lot, Sister Leonard. Thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure to see you, a pleasure to hear you also. Good. I want to go on to my good friend. I always call my good friend. I said, my good friend of suffering, Brother Ayogoro Obe, who is a culture man, and I always remind him of all what Daga used to tell me. about culture. That guy used to say, culture is the soul of a people. Culture is the soul of a people. And I was reminded him, I have a book for him. Somebody stole his book and I have a book for him. He hasn't come for it yet. But Brother Ayagoro Ume is one of the stalwarts of NJAC, one of the long-standing member of the National Joint Action Committee. He chaired the National Committee on Reparations. He chaired it. And he spent all his life, nearly all his life, as chairman of the NACC, the National Action Cultural Committee, all those concerts. In fact, I tell my students that Brother Ume has spent so many years in NACC that he's a wizard now in promoting shows and stage management, etc. for all those years. My mind goes back to the sacrifices he made. Writing his examination, for example, in 1970 in prison, studying history at UE from 67 to 70, writing in prison, getting his bachelor's degree in history, and continuing. Today I see he continues his writing these days in the newspapers these days, and we're reading all his articles. I was talking to the Prime Minister just last week, Brother Ume. I was talking to the Prime Minister last week, and he told me he's reading your articles. So keep on writing. Tell me he's reading your articles. He got a Shakona Medal in 1996 for his contribution to culture. And so he's going to talk to us about culture this afternoon. He's going to talk about those social transformations through culture and the arts, especially the transformation that came about from 1970. So the floor is yours, Brother Ayagoro Ume.
Thank you, Brother Moderator, Dr. Hollis Liverpool, Brother Chokdas. Thank you very, very much. And may I offer my personal congratulations to the panelists who spoke before. They have given us what could be loosely called a plethora of details very relevant to this day that we are observing, Rededication Day, during the 50th period of the 50th anniversary of the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970, as it is also called the Black Power Revolution. Now, I have to speak on the question of social transformation through culture and the arts. But one of the things that I have always sought to do is to pay respects to those who have passed on. We keep speaking about our ancestors, but we don't identify them by name. First of all, as I did during the prayer, I want to keep in our minds Brother Tuku Mohini, who is the brother of Brother Mbao Mohini. Tuku passed away about 2 days ago. And Tuku was a stalwart of the movement in Tobago and in Trinidad. He was a very voluble speaker, and we actually used to call him Brother Rap. But he was well known for his activism, and we must never forget him. But I also want to mention to you all that on this date, 50 years ago, the demonstration that was held started off in St. James, and it went all the way up to the Sawa Cemetery, and we visited the graves of 4 people who had died during the period of the Black Power Trinidad and Tobago Revolution. Quickly, we need to remember today Private Clyde Bacchus from the regiment. He's buried at the Mucurapo Cemetery. Voluntary fireman Keith Braffett, he buried at the Laperouse Cemetery. Michael Agarat, a brother from the blocks, he's buried at the Anglican Cemetery in Success Village. And Basil Davis, who was the earliest martyr of the revolution, killed brutally by a policeman just making an appeal to another policeman, please don't arrest the particular person that you're about to arrest, and the policeman killed him. And in that sense, the reference to Basil Davis is very, very important, because you see, several years ago, I wrote an article about Basil Davis as a representative of the new person that we were trying to create. Here was a man who saw someone being brutalized by the forces and just made an appeal, and the policeman killed him. And the essence of 1970 is that we were seeking to create a new man and a new woman. Now, the reason that NJAC through the NACC was so much involved in placing the arts and culture at the center of national development was that we were using those means of the arts and of our culture in the broadest sense of the word to build a new man and to build a new society. It's a process that started then. It has not finished, and I want to tell Sister Josanne, it has not finished. It may be subdued to a certain degree, but it still continues, because you need to remember great revolutionaries like Che Guevara, who stated that within socialism, there was an effort to create a new man. But it could not be done overnight. You had to build institutions to fit the new man in and through which the new man would be perceived. And what you have to look at is the work of the National Joint Action Committee over the years. There has been an ebb and a flow. Not everything that has been done to date, I am satisfied with it, but I am stating that, you remember that statement that used to be made by the revolutionaries in West Africa, La luta continua, the struggle continues. And NJAC itself has some important references that I think I need to bring to people's attention. One of the prime references is the Blue Book, in which NJAC states its whole philosophy. And when many people have come to me and I've given them copies of the book, a lot of people who have been doing their writings have made reference to the book. The problem is, as Valentino said, Trini have a very funny way of forgetting. And that amnesia is what is the problem. Because you need to remember, first of all, that Makandal Daga did not start off with NJAC or the Joint National Action Committee. He formed an organization in 1962 called Pegasus. And that organization paid a lot of attention to the artists in the country. In fact, it was the very first organization in the entire history of Trinidad and Tobago that offered national awards. Long before the PNM government established a system of national honors, since 1962 with the Pegasus organization, DAGA was offering national honors. And when the Joint National Action Committee was formed, an integral part of the work was a series of cultural rallies. Those rallies incorporated artists of the revolutionary persuasion, people like Brother Chogdas, and the rallies had the participation of artists not to pull crowds together, but they were an integral part of all that took place in the rally, because in the rallies, you had people speaking, drawing attention to different aspects of life in Trinidad and Tobago, and you also had the artists. The whole effort was to build the new man. From the rallies, we developed the Black traditions in art, which was actually started by Brother Cambon in Western Trinidad, and later on, Brother Bankole, late Brother Bankole, and myself took on the responsibility of having the Black traditions in art. So the efforts which NJAC was involved in was premised on building a new society. We were looking at the economy, we were looking at state ventures, activities of all kinds. In fact, what we were really doing was seeking to transform Trinidad and Tobago from its state previous to independence into an independent society, and to build a much more humane society. In fact, if you look around today, the complaint is that the society is no longer humane. But what NJAC was seeking to do was to build a more humane society. And there's one thing that I've often heard Sister Lisele Daga say, that whenever you met a person who has come out of 1970, there was a peculiar kind of warmth that you got from that person because their consciousness was developed in a way that was transformative, so that what a person who had experienced 1970 had deep within his soul, his or her soul, was, I am on a path to a new existence. The other thing that was important during that period is that it was premised on the building of a united nation. What Dr. Samaru stated about efforts for African and Indian unity and unity across the classes was really very important during the period of 1970. And one of the things that we said as an example of how NJAC was seeking to develop itself, it's written in the Blue Book, two things. Our different cultural expressions must contribute to the building of a united nation. That is written. And the other thing that was written is that all our peoples must have mutual respect for each other's different cultural expressions. In other words, looking at the reality of society just emerging, well, officially, legally, from colonialism, we are looking to build a united nation based on different premises. That is a goal that still exists. The thing that I will say all the time, if those who are in the leadership of the movement at this time are not carrying the movement forward, it is very much to the detriment of Trinidad and Tobago, because the goal of building a new society, the goal of building a united nations through culture and the arts remains still extremely valid. And I want to add something that to bring things directly to where we are now. The work that was done at that time was also premised on a principle of self-reliance. We stated the cultural development of the entire society must be firmly wedded to a principle of self-reliance. Here we are in the midst of the pandemic, and we are now scrambling to look at food security in a more serious way than we ever have. But way back in the 70s, I remember sitting at the feet of people like Dr. George Sami, who was bringing to us an understanding of how we could use our own produce as replacement for things that we were importing. And I don't know how it is that we have allowed those things just to slip away from us. We talk about, one of the ministers was recently talking about the fact that doubles don't have enough local input, and that created a big hurrah. But when we were doing what we were doing in the 70s, Dr. George Sami was speaking about composite flours to move gradually from reliance completely on wheat flour and to add flours based from our own starchy products. That is 50 years ago. No work seems to have been done along those lines to the point where we could have a transformation. Let us look, for example, in how we make doubles. It may seem ridiculous, but just recently, the Minister of Agriculture was complaining that we don't have enough local produce in doubles. And that I found to be very, very, very instrumental. The other thing about the question of self-reliance is that self-reliance, if we had inculcated that notion of self-reliance, it would have developed, or it would have worked side by side with developing the will for self-determination. Because what we were saying in 1970 is that we need to control our own affairs. You heard Brother Cambon speaking extensively on the fact that we move from just a few state enterprises to 60-something. A lot of people, particularly those within the PNM, will tell you, oh, that didn't have much to do with 1970. It had to do with the rise of the price of oil. And so, not so. The genesis of that movement came out of 1970. In fact, within 24 hours, the movement of 1970 had forced Eric Williams, the then Prime Minister, to purchase the Bank of London and Montreal and establish the National Commercial Bank under Philip Rushmore in 24 hours. Those who were the bankers in the country before were furious that you can't do that. But the force of the people made the then PNM administration fall in line with establishing an indigenous bank of a certain degree of importance in the society. In other words, our situation was that we were driving the country towards self-determination. And when attempts were made to stop the forward movement of what took place in 1970, and there was the declaration of the state of emergency, you had a situation where the feeling was that the military force of the government would have put people into a state of, it would have made us hide ourselves from ourselves. And that is why today's date was so important, because we determined that we will go back out and reinvigorate the country and rededicate ourselves to keeping the work continued. And our problem now, I am sorry to disagree with Sister Josan, is not that we trot out these things conveniently. Anniversaries are important. And I know that every single year, whether it is a large event or a small event, NJAC has had some event to ensure that rededication is a part of the process, because we have to reinvigorate ourselves every single year. And something is always done. But let me add a very important aspect of the question of social transformation through culture and the arts. If you have to do that, you have to build institutions. And I want again to make reference to Che Guevara, talking about building the new man within socialism. I know some people may say, well, how that come in? I like Cuba, and Cuba is communist, and so. The point is an important point. You have to establish institutions. Let me run through some of the institutions that NJAC had established. There are many institutions involving the arts, but they all had that consideration that we would build toward the whole question of a new society. You had the Black traditions in art. You had the Young Kings Calypso Monarch competition. You had Kings Go Forth. You had the top 20 Stars of Gold and Calypso of the Year awards. You had the Magnificent 7 awards. You had the Uncrowned Kings Calypso competition. You had a host of Emancipation Day programs, including concerts, rallies, seminars, etc. You had Indian Arrival Day rallies. NJAC was the first organization in Trinidad and Tobago, I say this without apology, to have Indian Arrival Day rallies. We also had Indian Independence Day rallies. We had African Liberation Day concerts, rallies, and shows. And a lot of people may not know this, but almost every year, except for this period here with COVID, we have been a part of the commemoration of the Jahaji massacre, the so-called Jose riots. And those institutions were helpful in building a consciousness. And that is why Sister Liseli Daga says, those who emerge from that period have a particular approach to life. What I don't like about it is that we have forgotten those who have passed on. I hope, for the sake of the Mohini family, that they don't forget Brother Tuku. I hope nobody forgets those 4 names that I called. And I hope nobody forgets the foundation members of the National Joint Action Committee. I heard Sister Liseli, Sister Josan speak about Nuevo Diaz. People have forgotten about these people. We have to do that because the memory that they have afforded us is very important. In my own case, I will say again, I am not too comfortable with how things are going. But the fact that we are having rededication day today in this way is good. We need to build on it. And I want to end by congratulating the University of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to congratulate Brother Chalkdust, Dr. Brinsley Samaru. I am not forgetting in any way Brother Winston Sweet. I don't know why, for whatever reason, he wouldn't mention that his organization was called UMRUBI, United Movement for the Reconstruction of Black Identity. They played a very important part down in San Fernando. I hope nobody forgets the late Michael Alves with the Young Power movement, which came around just around the same time. There are a lot of names that we must never forget because they all played their part. And I am happy that we are having this event today. I'm assuming that it's going to be recorded and probably put on YouTube for people to listen and to study. And I want to recommend, in the building of the new society and the new consciousness, that people seek to get copies of that book that was written by the National Joint Action Committee called the Blue Book, because it is blue in color. It's the People's Charter for the Development of a New Society. It is extremely important. As far as I'm concerned, the book is not yet finished. We did it, I think, a little too hurriedly just before the 81 election, but it encapsulated a lot of the thought of the National Joint Action Committee up to that time. And again, my congratulations to those who facilitated today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Ayaguru. And let me say that we shall not forget. I want to endorse 3 outstanding ones that you mentioned, that is the rallies. I want to endorse that those Black traditions in art and the African Liberation Day. And one of the reasons I want to endorse it is because I remember when we started those Black traditions in art and those rallies, that lots of calypsonians would come to me and they said that they learned how to conduct themselves on stage and they learned how to do concerts, etc., because they used to do a whole concert by themselves. They were their own MCs, they introduced their own songs, and they learned to just as how when we started Calypso Tentley way back in 1917, etc., so too the Calypso learned to become masters of the art of entertainment and masters of the art of in their own selves. So they learned a lot. So we shall not forget those things. Thanks a lot, Brother Ayago. And culture is so important, so very, very, very important that every time I tell people, and they look at me funny when I told them, I said, if you're not educated, if you're not bathed in culture, then you can't be called yourself educated. You must be bathed in the culture of your country. Now we have time now to ask questions, to answer questions. I have a question. One question, I'm not too sure if I got the question right, but I am asking, if you can send it back for me again. The question was that came up, the first question that came up was, is African unity a possibility? or is African unity? The guy was saying, is it something political? Is it can we, in other words, can we forge African unity? I didn't get you the wording properly of the question.
It says African Indian unity.
African Indian unity.
Is that
African Indian unity? Is it?
If it's a possibility.
Yeah. Is it a political reality?
It's a political reality. I was listening to about Iago, so I didn't get it. You want to ask? I don't know about Sister Leonard. You want to?
I will throw this to Kambon and to Igora. I have something to say, but I'll throw it to them because they both, I mean, Kambon is running the emancipation, or has been engaged in the Emancipation Support Committee.
Correct.
Igoro and himself were founding members of NJAC. So I think they're in a good place to respond.
Say something there. Brother Kambon, you want to say something on that?
Yes. If we ask if African Indian unity is a reality now, the answer is no. If it is a possibility, the answer is yes. And I think that the period we are discussing, 1970, established that very, very firmly. And I would give you just two examples. When we were now building NJAC in the this would have been in the 69 period, we used to have lectures in many communities, including African communities, places like up Laventille Road and all of that. And one of the persons who was with us many times was Dr. Samuel. And he was going there to speak, given the nature of the communities, almost exclusively to African brothers and sisters. And because of the environment that had been created by the National Joint Action Committee at the time, you find that he was welcomed and he had tremendous impact on the people to whom he spoke. And the thing is, he was able to talk both about African history and about Indian history. And both themes went down well in those communities. The thing about African Indian unity is the basis, the ideological basis on which we attempt to build it. This society started off, or started its independence with the idea that, you know, all of we is one. I mean, all of we is one culturally and everything else, and that it will be divisive to look at peoples. And that is a lack of reality. So there is a pretense for the sake of national unity, as opposed to trying to build unity on the basis of knowledge, mutual respect, and that is knowledge of self, and each other. To the basis of knowledge, a common agenda, the need to forge a common agenda for the development of Trinidad and Tobago. Unity doesn't mean people pretending to be the same, but people able to accept differences. Okay, that is a long topic, but I'll stop there.
Well spoken, Brother Campbell. I think you captured it. But Ume, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I certainly wish to speak about it. To a great degree, efforts have been made to scuttle the African and Indian unity. You see, when you attack power, power makes every effort to ensure that what is being proposed by those who are opposed to power does not take place. And this is why I make the point about building institutions. For example, under the leadership of Sister Lizelle Daga, NJAC had an Institute of Race Relations. It went along very, very well, and a lot of its work was in the secondary schools. But there's an area of African Indian unity that I want to mention that I think may be slipping past some people. The development of soca. Ras Shorty I developed soca as a means of bringing Indian rhythm together with African rhythm, sometime 74, 75, because he had grown up in Hindustan. He understood the relationship. And the thing about it is, I know certain calypsonians, Chonky, you're not one, were attacking what he was doing. The great maestro was attacking what he was doing, but it prevailed. Unfortunately, today, soca is a fast-paced music, 150, 160, 170 beats per minute or something like that. It is not what Ras Shorty had put forward. But that institution building is important. We need institutions to make sure that what is proposed is maintained. That is what we have to do.
There was a, Hollis, there was a part 2 to that question. Is the movement still viable? Is the movement still viable?
The movement of NJAC?
The part 2 to the question is African-Indian unity a political reality? And is the movement still viable?
It is something that is desirable. There are things that are being done to upset it. But look at something recently. You had the election with the within the UNC, the internal election. And one of the comments that was made by Mrs. Prasad Bisesa is, look, the opposing team, they have no Africans at all. And the thing about it, the response from the other team was that where Africans came, they were dissuaded. But no political party in Trinidad and Tobago today could put up a team in which there is not an understanding of some kind of unity. But we need to build on it. And we need people to understand much more about each other. For example, I am very, very passionate about the fact that we are in the midst of the International Decade for People of African Descent. And here you have a government that says it is African, gets the support from Africa, but nothing is done. That International Decade will build the respect of all the other ethnic groups about Africans, but nothing is being done. And that is one of the problems.
Okay. After Dr. Samaru.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Samaru. Dr. Samaru wanted to say something.
You need to unmute his mic.
Okay.
Yeah, may I have your mic? Go ahead, Dr. Samaru.
You hearing me now?
No, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to points I want to make. I want to tell Brother Igore, he spoke quite a lot about the Blue Book. You know, if in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s, you mention the word Blue Book, you'll be stoned. You'll be licked down by black people, because the Blue Book was a book used in South Africa to deal with African labor. And the Blue Book noted down every time you missed a day or anything, and when you were blanked by the Blue Book, you couldn't go in any other oil field and get a job, because the first thing they want to see is the Blue Book. Yep. So I just want to tell him that the Blue Book was a very terrible burden on the black community, and he should be careful when he talk about Blue Book, because right now we don't know the origin of the Blue Book, but that Blue Book, if you are told an African anything about Blue Book, is stones and boulders eating you, because the Blue Book was most detested and was one of the important reasons for the uprising in 1937. The other point I want to make is that we have to look at some of the things that they did before 1937 to bring Africans and Indians together. For example, in October 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia. There was the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. And in Trinidad, there were large demonstrations all over the country, led by Butler and Rienzi. And when the African people and the Indian people saw these two leaders leading marches and talking about the importance of Ethiopia as one of the creators of human history and so on. That sort of thing conscientized a lot of people, where Africans and Indians joined together with these two leaders on the platform, telling them about the greatness of Africa. So I am suggesting that that kind of conscientization should now take place, where we spend more time in informing. You'll be surprised about how ignorant people are about, the possibility and the similarity between the two cultures. Those of us who know. The vast majority don't know, and we don't expect them to learn by instinct. We have to start a program of conscientization, a program of education. And I'm saying that bringing together, that program of bringing together Africans and Indians changed the history of Trinidad and Tobago, because the Trinidad and Tobago example was taken by the rest of the Caribbean. And out of that, that's a watershed. 1937 is a watershed in Caribbean history. And the beginning of that watershed, I'm telling you, takes place in Trinidad, and then it goes to the rest of the Caribbean. So that is something.
I want to say something here, Brinsley.
Yeah.
I want to say something about this concept of the Blue Book, because the way you put it there, you want to make the Blue Book negative. But in fact, during the colonial period, there were Blue Books, which were records of what was happening within the colonial situation. And Jack conveniently named the book Blue Book because it was a Blue Book.
Yeah, well, all right. You see, the state.
That's all.
Yeah.
So don't if you put it that way, you're going to confuse people. Let me leave that out now.
But no, I'm just stating a historical fact.
Yes, it's a fact, but it is not really relevant to what we are doing here now. But we have made the Blue Book a positive thing.
Right. No, well, that is good. But I'm simply saying that when people are reading at that time the history and they see the Blue Book, it has a very negative connotation. That's all I'm saying. Right. And people are going more and more into the history. So that doesn't mean to say it should change, but I'm just saying we should be conscious.
And one should know that Butler fought
negative.
Butler fought a lot against that Blue Book, eh?
Absolutely not. And you couldn't mention the Blue Book to Butler. I mean, he wanted to hit you one time. Yeah.
There's a question here about Hollis.
Yeah.
There's a question here about, has the negative work done by the politicians and media taken us too far for us to retain the glorious days of the 1970s? And it actually was where I wanted to jump in. I wanted to talk about, if not the elephant, maybe the calf in the room.
I have not seen the question, but you can jump in because I'm not seeing them.
Yeah, I would, because I'm looking at the chat. And, because I think it's linked to this discussion about this. Cambon made the statement that it is now desirable because we have seen to regressed in terms of race relations in the country. And that, to me, is a direct output or a direct consequence of the kind of politics, party politics and politics of governance that we have engaged in. That's why I say I'm, going to address the calf or the elephant in the room. And with the advent of social media, the fact that this bile and vitriol is encouraged. And in fact, the two major political parties have even hired trolls and people to push a particular narrative on social media, so that even any criticism or any critiquing could result in really nasty knee-jerk responses, particularly on social media. The other thing too, I find dealing with this issue of what happened in 1970 and coming out of that period. I mean, it's not to say that it was the glory days, but we've all talked, and as Leslie said, somehow today, if I meet someone who is of that period or who lived through that period or had a relationship, there is a fondness. Even if this person is a multimillionaire, whatever it is, there's a quiet and sometimes overt expression of like two spirits meet again, because we shared something really special. And I think that we have to take responsibility. I mean, I'm not talking about this group, but I'm talking about the collective we. And Guru talked about building institutions. The fact that we think that we have a few, I mean, NJAC is doing its work, ESC is doing its work, and other groups are doing their work. But what prevails are these political or governance structures and institutions that are forcing a kind of narrative down people's throat. And I think that we have to counter that. I think that we have to, and that's why the thing about building institutions and doing things in different paths become very, very important, because it has become obscene. It makes one cringe. It makes me cringe to see the kinds of things and people who will meet me and shake my hand, and because I don't agree with them, call me an apologist for this or an apologist for that. You're an apologist for Rowley or you're an apologist for Kamla, depending on what position you may take on any given day. So I think that we have really seen the advent over a period of time, maybe with some illuminating moments of national unity, where the race relations in the country has really hit an all-time low. And I think that me personally, as somebody who's now in my 60s, I'm not going to bury my head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist, and that this one is to blame and that one is to blame. And I think that when you see the campaigns, like in the last elections, when you see people putting people and thinking, well, okay, put a particular kind of person in a constituency because they will appeal to the Black people, and this one will appeal to the Indian people, or those things have really eroded a lot of the social capital between us. And I think that we have to confront that. I mean, that's just one little aspect, but I feel very strongly about that in particular,
Well taken. Your point is well taken.
I would like to make a comment on two of the points made here. One is the question of the African-Indian unity, because we have to look at the historical context within which all of this is happening. And it has always been the policy of the colonial masters of the past, as well as the systems that they still maintain today, to seek to create divisions in order to be able to dominate and control. And this is why you could go back to the Jahaji massacre. When the Indians were having their celebration by themselves, there was not a problem. But from the time the Africans began to join, they decided to stop it. It's part of the historical policy to divide Africans and Indians. And today, what we are seeing is a situation where people are using race for to achieve political ends. And it has become almost embedded in the society. But it does not mean that it must not be addressed. It does not mean that it cannot be addressed. We have seen in the period of Butler, in the period of the 70s, where we were able to transcend those divisions because we saw it as necessary. And we also saw it as part of that humanizing approach that needs to be used if we are going to build a better society. But even beyond that, if we are talking about national development, we must also talk about national unity. And that unity is going to come through a more collective commitment to doing whatever needs to be done in terms of the conveying of information, drawing on our historical experiences, and as well creating values that are more humane and that are more based on the collective. So yes, we know that we are not in the best place where race relations is concerned, but more of us need to make that commitment to do what is necessary, not only for better human relations, but for a better society, for better examples for our youth and the children are those who are coming after us. It has to be done in the home, it has to be done in the places of work, and it has to be done in the society at large. But I also wanted to make reference to the question of the Blue Book that Brother Ome spoke about, because in the writing of the Blue Book, NJAP used our people approach to decision making and to progress, where we hosted approximately 600 consultations right across the nation, Trinidad and Tobago, inviting the public to speak on their vision for Trinidad and Tobago, gathering that information, gathering their suggestions, gathering their criticisms, and bringing it all together. And it is out of those consultations that we sat down and began to formulate the Blue Book. Because remember that in 1970, on the 4th of March, NJAC launched what we call the People's Parliaments, bringing the people into the decision-making process, which would have started at Woodford Square, which NJAC renamed the People's Parliament on the 7th of March. And it did not stop there. The People's Parliaments were held in different parts of Trinidad, as well as in different parts of Tobago, giving the public that sense that their voice mattered, that they had the right to be part of a process that is going to affect their lives in the future. Okay, so that being said, it would give us an idea of how the Blue Book in itself came. It was not just NJAC leaders sitting down and writing that document. We drew on the comments from our people right across our nation.
I'd like to, Chair, if I will, if I may. I think, we're going to get to the point before we wrap up where we have to be thinking about maybe some of the things that we need to be doing going forward, or what are some of the things that can come out of this. One of the pluses of COVID-19 is that whatever reticence they may have been to use technology or what have you, especially the online forums, everyone has been forced here. We're talking today, and this is exactly what we're doing, all in our homes or wherever we are, and we're connecting. And I think that we have to recognize the value proposition of how we will try to reach, share information, and continue to have these conversations, which we can now do in this virtual. It does not replace the social contact. It does not replace the human engagement, but it certainly allows us to accelerate and to have greater penetration in terms of reaching people, because everybody uses a device, of whether they're using it for the right reasons or not, they're using it, whether they're using it for Facebook, Instagram, selfies, whatever it is that they're doing. So I think that we need to be able to ride this wave. We need to be able to use this opportunity now, which has always been there, but the fact that people are wedded to it, that we need to now create the conversations and proliferate the information, proliferate the conversations that can be ongoing, that are not just, and Ayagoro, I certainly did not mean that the commemorative or the annual commemoration or commemorative events were, not hitting the mark. The value of memory is, I have a t-shirt that says the value of memory. So I believe that, but we need to be doing a lot more. And now we can embrace, and we could shift our focus a little more to say, okay, we don't always have to get together in one space to have a meeting. And we don't have to have a big conference that is going to cost a whole pile of money. I think that we really need to use this technology now as part of the strategy of being able to reach people, and particularly our young people, particularly what they like to call the millennials, the ones who are thinking in X number of characters, and they're Instagramming and they're TikToking and they're doing whatever they do. We have to use these tools now to our advantage to help enlighten, educate, bring awareness, encourage discussion, promote, promote engagement. I mean, that's almost like my summary, isn't it?
Point taken. But at least we coming out of this, Leonard, we just definitely have to have a committee, have a committee where we're going to sit down and make recommendations for the future and see how we're going to continue this thing. I can see Brother Mutema and Professor Samaru, etc., forming a small committee, and where we can sit back and say, where do we go by this? Where do we go from here, etc. Not just we shouldn't wait until next year to have a re-dedication. There are some things that we can do in the meantime, etc. And I'm sure UTT will be able to help in any way. We have gone way past our time, but I'm sure we can take another question. I can't answer the question, but I'm sure if there's another question, we can take another question.
It says, let's be honest with ourselves. In order to have racial unity in Trinidad and Tobago, we must get rid of the politics of the PNM and the UNC.
I think you said that already. We made that point already. Somewhere we made that point.
Okay,
we made that point also.
Okay, someone was asking about where to get the book, the blue book.
Answer, please.
The blue book is available at the NJAC office.
Right.
That came up on the screen, 40 Duke Street, Port of Spain.
40 Duke Street.
Yeah.
Right. And then you see, so that needs to go online. That's another thing that needs to go online. And is there any other, someone was asking about, I've seen 2 movies done on 1970 for several years, up to last year's 1970 anniversary. I've been checking Nalis in Port of Spain and it's not available. Hopefully UTT has copies, or maybe the UE library does. I don't know.
Copies of what?
The 2 films that were done in 1970. Of course, those films will belong to the people who produced them. So but maybe that's something that can go into a repository.
Correct.
That can now be made accessible to people who are doing research or who may want to get it. And so, yeah.
We are now developing at UTT a museum where we'll have all those things, all lectures in the past. We will have all them things for the public.
One more question, Hollis. Yeah. Outside of the education system, what else is being done to keep the memory of 1970 alive? Beyond the Calypso competitions, how do we create mass awareness?
Good question. I agree. You want to start? We do our part. We have done our part. For example, one of the shows we did the Independence Calypso competition. We brought it back. We are bringing back competitions like that. We are recording all the past. We record all the things that we have in the past. We try to have CDs. The Academy we appointed somebody to produce all those past things in the past. We're going to put them on CDs, etc. But so much work to be done. So much work to be done to make people aware of what is happening in society and what happened in the past. So much work to be done. UTT is doing this part. All of us have to do our part. All of us.
I don't want to speak on behalf of NJAC, seeing that I've resigned my executive positions, but I would think that an effort should be made to build an audio visual archive with all the necessary information, and that initiative, which I have suggested a long time now, should start within the bowels of the National Joint Action Committee. And then there's a process by which the organization needs to get out to the secondary schools and to use the social media as effectively as they possibly can.
If I can intervene,
an archive, a national archive. Well, Brother Mutema?
Yes, just to continue a bit in terms of what Brother Ome, in terms of what he was stating. I think definitely there's need, yes, for more archiving. I think earlier, Sister Josanne mentioned that challenge to our intelligentsia. I think there needs to be much more work done by our academic community in terms of delving into more research in terms of 1970 and events that occurred. As I mentioned earlier in my deliberation, there are so many lessons to be learned from that revolution. And the thing about it is, as I said, almost every issue under the sun was dealt with. And solutions given, perspectives given, guidelines. So I think our academic community, I think, needs to be, as I said, more challenged in terms of delving more into that period, doing the type of analyses that are necessary to make that interpretation available to our population, particularly our young people at this time. We also, as an organization, will be making our own efforts along those lines, where, for one thing, Brother Ome mentioned the emphasis on the student population. I think we need to pay particular emphasis there. And as an organization, we have already discussed our plans, and those plans to unfold. I think a lot was scuttled by the COVID-19 pandemic, this period where we had the intention of starting a particular program going throughout our secondary schools. Also, the documenting of information is necessary through publication of books, as well as video, audio and video material. A sad thing about it is that in terms of the availability of a lot of the video material, a lot of those are lodged in institutions abroad, particularly in England. We did have some of it here, which was at the TTT television stations, and that was unfortunately destroyed. A lot of it was destroyed. I think there is still some available, and we have been making efforts to see if we can acquire at least some of those, but it's a very tiring process, a lot of times very frustrating process, but we have to continue, as I said, to keep digging and trying to see how we could compile and make that information available. So those efforts are in train, but there are so many stumbling blocks that you meet along the way. But we do not intend for that to deter us. It will just slow down the process, and it may take much longer to achieve than we were hoping that it could achieve. But be that as it may, we have started that process, and we intend to continue in that process in terms of trying to document a lot of this information to make it available, particularly to the youth of our society.
La lucha continua. And I want to say that we have, at UDT, we have appointed Mr. Imai, and he's heading a committee to bring into fruition a museum, a virtual museum. Right. We already started, and any way we can help, I'm sure you talk to the board of UGT, they will help. Whatever you say, I'm sure they're going to help. So Professor Imbe is very strong on that, to continue this museum. We have gone way past our time.
We run out of time.
Yeah, but you want to say something quickly about the Kamban?
Very quickly, because I feel that we have not said enough about the education system as a critical tool in bringing about this African-Indian unity.
Well, that should be our conference. We should start that should be a conference.
Yes, and the other thing, I feel that
a conference.
Yeah, the question of
one-day webinar. Probably our next webinar could be that. Looking at education, you know.
Yep. I want to say something else too, that quite apart from formal education system, it is that, and what should happen now from as soon as possible, because you're going to change in curriculum, and that is all difficult, but we should try to develop a program where there's cultural sensitivity training of teachers, because we have a lot of problems in schools on that.
That's the problem. You know, Kamban, we used to have teacher training, but now what?
Then include cultural sensitivity training.
Right. Yeah. And I always say the reason why culture children is because they are the teachers yet.
Yep, professionals, everybody. And the other thing is that, you know, there was a cultural program done by Sister N2 and Brother Ravi G. And both people are very strong people in their culture. N2 in terms of Risha and all that, Ravi G, the culture.
All right.
and they trained a class to put on a production in which you had both African and Indian mythology was put out, and in a way that made people feel a sense of togetherness. So you need to get our artists involved in that way as well. And the final thing I would say, you know, there's so much more to say, but we're at the end of the day. But let me give, in terms of the films that was spoken about, one is produced by Joseph Valley. I don't know if I don't know if he's in the country, but if I could see if I could find some contact for him about one of those films.
He used to be at the university.
Roseanne might be able to help me the name of that brother who produced the first film on
Stephen Cadies. Stephen Cadies.
Stephen Cadies.
Yeah.
So I think that if people know that, they might have a basic knowledge to.
But it also demonstrates the proactiveness of NJAC and the people who were involved to actually take charge of a documentation process. In other words, not be fly on the wall or being approached by others. I think that there's a very proactive role, some of which could be very simple. People are using phones now to document interviews and the rest of it, so that I think the virtual world presents opportunities in a way in which it may not have been envisaged before. It doesn't exclude everything else, but it allows us to sort of leapfrog over a number of constraints by just using a smartphone and a Steadicam to have conversations. Like I could sit and talk with you, Hollis, and get into your head and get your whatever it is, and it's documented and it's there to be edited, to be used, to be part of an unedited and then edited segment. So I think that this kind of strategy is really what is required now. And to have an institutional partner like the UTT means that one is able to combine methodology and institutional framework and support with the content, with the people who are going to bring it to the fore, or who know how to probe, or who may know the people to go and speak with. And I think those two things now have to come together in a more cohesive way.
Sure. Well, this session is being recorded, by the way. This whole session today has been recorded in case you want to get copies. This whole session has been recorded. I think we had a beautiful day. I think we had a beautiful evening. I think we have a lot of work to do. Mutema, Mohini, Ayago, even though you have resigned, you have to jump in. You have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of work still to do. You can't let you get out of Ayago. A lot of work to be done. Let me bring to you. I'm serious about that. You can't leave. You can't leave us like that, Ayago. I want to bring to the podium for the Akhenaten.
Oh my goodness.
For the Akhenaten Daga is the communication advisor for NACC, and he's an instructor in math at the West Indies. He is MPhil in maths, specializing in graph theory. Whenever I hear people doing maths, maths is such an important area in life, etc. Maths and the arts, of course. And I want to ask him to bring closing remarks on behalf of the organization. Brother Akhenaten.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hollis Liverpool. I just want to also thank, before I even begin, as mentioned what UTT has done, my family would like to thank UTT for the help in publishing a book entitled Thoughts of the Chief Servant, that was written by Brother Makemba Kunle, and the UTT had published it. It is a group of his sayings and from his various meetings and quotes. I just want to read, as we, session is about knowledge. I just want to read just 4 lines from a quote he gave about knowledge and events like these. He says, "How do we inject people with an almost inhuman desire for knowledge? A thirst for knowledge must exist. If there is to be any greed amongst the people who aspire to greatness, that greed must be for knowledge. We must go back to the words of our ancestors and make that a motto of our lives. Man, know thyself." And coming from knowledge of experiences that we have been through, it makes the effort for knowledge of ourselves even greater. We want to give much thanks to the following: to all those who were part of the revolution of 1970 and no longer here with us. particularly Chief Silver Makandal Daga, of course, leader of revolution. But we also remember Brother Tuku Mahini, a most tireless and committed warrior who left us recently, as was mentioned. Brother George Weeks, Brother Winston Leonard, Brother Basil Davis, and so many others, including those mentioned by Brother Omi in his address. We would like to thank the servant leader, the executive and members of NJAC for their determination. Despite the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, they were able to successfully host a program of activities this year to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Trinidad and Tobago Black Power Revolution, including this one. Special thanks to the chairman and the board of governors of UTT for their support, especially also for Professor Hollis Liverpool and the Academy of Arts, Letters, Culture, and Public Affairs UTT for facilitating the event. We'd like to also thank the presenters, including Professor Winston Sweet of Engineering UTT, Brother Mbao Mohini, Dr. Kafa Kambon, Sister Sally Daga, Dr. Brinsley Samu, Sister Josanne Leonard, Brother Ayago Omi, and all those who posted questions in the question form today. Thank you all, and may God smile on us as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Dedication Day 1970.